Good morning. This is Dishha Bagchi for ThePrint, and today we have with us Lieutenant General retired HS Panag, and we will discuss his column this week. It's time for Army to close 2021 Nagaland Encounter case. External threats are looming large. Welcome, General. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You mentioned that since the Northeast Democratic Alliance and the BJP returned to power in the state in Nagaland this year, the political discourse or the reaction around the 2021 encounter of 6 civilians in the state has declined. So why do you think this is the case?
You see, when the incident took place on 4th of December 2021, the emotions were running very high because it was Nagaland has been relatively quiet for the ever since the Naga Peace Accord 2015 has been signed. In fact, since 2015, insurgencies at a very low ebb, and suddenly this kind of incident, which not only first 6 were killed, then 7 were killed in retaliatory violence, 1 more elsewhere during the protests. So it was a major incident for this area, for Oting village in Mon district. And so emotions were running very high. There was widespread criticism across the party lines. Even the Home Minister gave a statement in the Parliament regretting the incident and calling it an incident of mistaken identity. So at that time, it was incumbent upon the state government to have organized, ordered a special investigating team by the state police to file necessary charges. At that time, nobody deemed it fit to clarify that in all such cases where the Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been invoked, and in areas which are declared as disturbed areas like Nagaland, most of it was then, that you require a sanction of the state, of the central government before any prosecution takes place. So the police carried out its investigations and filed the charge sheet on 30th of May last year, and they charged the military personnel with murder, attempt to murder, and various other sections of the IPC read in conjunction with these 2 primary acts which were applied. So obviously, the court straight away emerged that there is a requirement to take central government permission.
Right.
The permission was sought, by them. In the meantime, the families went to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court stayed the proceeding, pending the sanction until such time the sanction was given.
Right.
So finally, on 12th of April this year, the sanction was refused, and this was informed by the police to the court. Now, this was actually a fait accompli. It had to happen this way, because till date there never has been any sanction given to prosecute such cases in civil courts, irrespective of what type of cases they were. Since 1958, that's the time since Armed Forces Special Powers Act has been invoked in various states. Permission has never been granted. So now naturally the people whose expectations had been raised that the perpetrators of the alleged human right violation. I'm saying alleged because the Army version is different. Human right violation, now they'll be brought to justice. So expectations had been raised for the last 1 year, and but not knowing that permission would not be granted. So this time, the local people are still protesting. Like I have quoted the statement of the Oting Students Union president, who is really in talking in great anguish that as if life of the Nagas and people of Oting has got no significance and it can be violated with, impunity, the human rights there. So, but the political reaction has got a cover. And the cover is that the central government has not granted the sanction, and this is the law. And this, mind you, was known last year too. So
it didn't come as a surprise that sanctions won't be given.
To the political class, it was no surprise.
Right.
Because everyone knows that this sanction is not been granted till date.
Right.
Till date. Since 1958. No sanctions have been given.
Yeah. So it wasn't really a surprise to any of the political leaders of the state that sanctions
it shouldn't have been a surprise. So naturally, at that time, you see what happened. Emotions were running high. Elections were due to take place in Nagaland in February 2022. And BJP is a very prominent stakeholder in the state. And so it was required to probably, you can say, to assuage the feelings of this thing, and but the end result was very obvious.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the Ministry of Defense and the government in general, they denied the sanction. But what do you think are the government's motivations behind denying the sanction? I know that they've never given the sanction in the first place since 1958, but now with the BJP government kind of revoking AFSPA from a lot of areas in the Northeast, still denying the sanction this year, what do you think are the motivations there?
There is no ulterior motivation.
Okay.
You see what happens, that Disturbed Areas Act, once it is declared, and the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is invoked. Now, why is Armed Forces Special Powers Act? It is invoked because unlike the police and the central police forces, the armed forces do not have the cover of the Code of Criminal Procedure. They don't have the powers for search, for seizure, and for taking action against unlawful gatherings and all, which are imposed time to time to maintain law and order. So the army has no such powers. Yes, when the army is called out in aid to civil authority in normal times to control riots and all, at that time, army is used on the express permission given by the magistrate who is supposed to be present. And he gives it in writing that take necessary action to quell this disturbance or quell this aggressive mob. In terms of that. So then the army takes action. But in a disturbed area where insurgency is taking place and where there's large-scale law and order violations and murders are taking place, other crimes. So the army has no powers. To give the army the requisite powers, this act was formulated by the parliament in 1958. And it was an earlier act. There was an act during colonial times also. But in 1958, it was formally enacted by the parliament, which gives the army enabling, this thing to act for it to function. Right. So that is the aim. Now, that this act seems, when you look at it to a layman, is draconian in the sense it gives the authority to use force, by right from this thing of a non-commissioned officer, that's an NCO, Naik, Havaldars, upwards, and also search, seizure, etc., and destruction of hideouts and bombs and all that are found with the insurgents. So these powers this act seemingly is draconian, and the act also provides protection from prosecution. Now, when you on the other hand look at the civil law, in case of civil law, when you fire at somebody, the police as it has got protection, and the police is itself under the political government, which orders the police to act. When the army takes action, and there's a civil government also there, and the police, which as per its own jurisdiction files the cases, it looks at the cases very differently. Yes. It looks at that anyone who is killed because he is our own citizen, that it is murder.
Yeah.
Okay, so they will start charging soldiers for murder. And since plus the local police can also be influenced by the insurgents, because in the beginning of the insurgency, there is a the law and order machinery has collapsed. And even at times, the police and the state administration and the political class gets compromised. I'm talking about the very initial stages, not the later stages.
Yeah.
So now, at that time, the soldiers would unnecessarily be harassed in the civil courts. There have been times when it is alleged that even the lower judiciary has also compromised. So to safeguard the soldiers from such these things, so this has been this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it is, I don't think there's an ulterior motive. It is because in our country, we were still going through the process of nation building, especially on our fringes, like Jammu and Kashmir. It happened in Punjab. It has happened in the Northeast, in almost all the states. So during these times, it was necessary for the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to be applied, and it is necessary to protect the soldiers. The problem that has occurred is that it's the length of time. Or the solution is political. Army has been deployed indefinitely. So while the political governments are there, the police is functioning normally, judiciary is functioning normally, high court normally, and there's also extrajudicial authority in terms of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, in which Army takes action. So that's a separate thing. We can discuss it later. Yeah. But I don't think there's any ulterior motive. And but the important thing is that the central government doesn't give permission, but the onus is then on the army. That within the Army Act, since the army knows whether the act was in good faith or it was a rogue action or not, to proceed with the necessary action. So there's no ulterior motive on part of the central government.
But for this case in particular, the SIT probe, as you mentioned, also charged these personnel with murder charges, among others. So there was proof or evidence that whatever the action that was taken by the army personnel, in a sense, against these civilians should be investigated further. So in this particular case, did the government have any motivation to deny the sanction?
No. Again, you see, this is quite normal. What happened is quite normal. And the same thing has been happening over the years.
Right.
Whenever, and especially once the civilian elected government is in power. Okay. When there's president's rule, there is a certain amount of consonance between the way the president functions and the presidential rule functions and the governor on his behalf and the army. It's less. But once the civil government comes to power, what happens is that two parallel investigations start. The army investigates the cases and the civil police investigates the cases.
Right.
They can be on the same lines, but the investigation will be done separately in all these cases. When the police files the charges, the army will then come forward and say that we don't agree with these charges. Our investigations are different. So we would like to invoke the provisions of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Now, if the conclusion is the same, the civil courts can then tell the army, okay, our conclusion and your conclusion is the same. Please take necessary action. Okay,
right.
It can be said, and it's only when the army feels differently and the police feel differently that the problem comes. Now, once the army says we invoke the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, you please hand the case over to us, and you have no jurisdiction to try this case.
Right.
So at times, it's given the seriousness of the case, the civil courts and pressed by the police do feel, and probably egged on by the political government, that let this case progress, because the civilians feel that the army will cover up the case.
Right.
So long as this feeling is there, The case progresses, it goes to the High Court. High Court again, the army invokes the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Finally, at some stage, it is said, please take central government's permission. So central government, as I said, has never given a sanction till date. As long as the army had a robust mechanism for dealing with such cases, dealing especially with rogue actions or bad faith actions, there was never a problem, because army justice is far quicker. And there have been hundreds of cases in which the army has itself dealt with the violations of human rights in the insurgency areas. The problem comes up when there's a feeling in the general public, or there is a kind of this feeling can also be inspired by the terrorists, that the army has a lot to hide. Army is vindictive. It carries out rogue actions, but yet shies away from taking action. If there's a feeling, such feeling prevailing, that's one part. At times, the army itself tends to safeguard its own people. It can happen at the lower level, and at times it is all pervasive, right? And the third thing is that at times it is the general environment prevailing in the country, and especially the far right wing opinion and what we now call new nationalism, in the sense that a person being tied to a jeep, irrespective of the circumstances, is a gross violation of human rights and Geneva Conventions. Yet, when this incident happened in 2017, at the behest of Major Ritul Gogai, there was, the whole nation stood in support of the actions of the major. And at that time, I was one of the few persons who still opposed it and said, this is not right. It is not ethically right to do so, irrespective of the circumstances. And the circumstances, as made out by Major Ritul Gogai and the official version, was suspect. It was their version was full of holes. It was not upheld by even the evidence available through open source intelligence. I mean, whatever is available in the newspaper, it was not upheld. So all this gives a feeling to the public at large that the army has a lot to hide. So in my view, overall, the conduct of the Indian Army is exemplary. We have been taking action, and there is no reason for the civilian population to feel that the army will not take action. But there have been deviations and there have been aberrations by the army itself in certain cases where they have tried to hide or cover up the errant actions or rogue actions of the
You mentioned in the column that in this particular case, that while the army can prosecute their personnel based on military law, in this particular case, they haven't given a clear statement, or they've also been, they've hindered stating their position in the case, as well as initiating action against the personnel in the case. So what do you think is stopping them or restricting them from firstly stating their position on what they think happened or what they're going to do, but also initiating action against these personnel?
I think is poor public relation, poor PR management by the armed forces, because as soon as the incident had taken place last year, the army itself is on record to say that, and I have quoted that there, that this matter is deeply regretted. It will be investigated, in a thorough manner, and necessary action would be taken. So this is the army statement in 2021 when the case took place, immediately after the incident. Then, at a number of times in 2022, the army said the court of inquiry is about to be finalized. Right? Yes, because of the case being in civil courts, the army's proceedings were as I told you, get stayed. Such time the case gets resolved and the central government gives the sanction, which itself was delayed by, by a period of 10 months.
Yeah.
So now that the permission has not been granted, the decks were clear with effect from 12th of April for the army to proceed with take necessary action. The court of inquiry has already been completed, as mentioned by the Eastern Army Commander, General Kalpa. He mentioned on 15th of April.
Right.
But then the next statement should have been there by the army or by the public relations officer of the Ministry of Defense to say that, the inquiry has been held. Now we are proceeding with the case and we shall keep the public informed as to what action is going to be initiated. And because prima facie, there is a case. Okay, the case is like this, that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act does not allow action with impunity. Even the act, which is seemingly draconian, has got a lot of safeguards. Firstly, the action has to be in good faith.
Yeah.
That means there should be no ulterior motive on part of the troops doing the action, whether for reward or for otherwise, out of vindictive, out of vendetta. It has to be as per the law of the land. That means you are taking action against insurgents, you are taking action against terrorists. Number two, a certain degree of warning has to be given.
Yes.
And then Section 4 of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act says that there has to be some sort of a provocation.
Yeah.
No, in this case, seemingly there was no provocation.
Yeah.
Identity. There was no. It was not clear whether the civilians were insurgents or not. It was violation of the Chief of Army Staff's commandments, which says no violation of human rights. In fact, they used to earlier say that the human rights must be maintained at the cost of mission accomplishment. That means a mission can be sacrificed if there's a fear that human rights would be violated. And in this case, the army who has said that we signaled the vehicle to stop, it didn't stop, so we opened fire. But was there a barrier? Was the ambush site, the vehicle must have slowed down? Was anything done to? It was a case of unprovoked fire. So prima facie, the army's own rules of engagement, army and the Chief of Army Staff's commandments, the Supreme Court's guidelines on counter-terrorist operations in insurgency areas, there is prima facie there's a violation. So the army should have said through a suo motu statement that we are examining the case in court of inquiry and action will be taken in due course. And I have no doubts that the army will take action. But it all depends upon what have they found. Because they had a chance to. Army courts can also interview. They have interviewed all soldiers. They must have been asked to examine all soldiers. They would have examined civilians. They would have examined eyewitnesses. So it's a proper procedure. It's not something that is arbitrary.
But I think there should have been a little bit of transparency that, these investigations were happening in the first place. As you mentioned, that the PR team of the armed forces, they should have been a little more clear with the public and more.
Certainly, transparency is very important. And especially in such sensitive matters.
Exactly.
And a suo motu statement, even at this stage by the army, would, I think, assuage the civilian feelings, and civilians will know that the army will take action. And it's not going to let the matter pass.
Right. So, towards the end of your column, you call for the removal of AFSPA from the Northeast, proposing that the army return to the barracks and prepare for India's other external threats. And recently, the BJP government has been revoking the act from certain parts of the Northeast. But do you think that such cases where civilian attention has been going towards these regions, especially because of such unprovoked firing and things like that, are these cases pushing the government's hand? Or do you think PM Modi is trying to appear as sort of the problem solver or the savior of the Northeast in a sense? that now the things have calmed down. Because of the BJP government, we're now successfully trying to remove the act. What do you think is the motivation?
I think, let alone the BJP government, I think all governments across the board would like, our nation to be a cohesive nation, and that no one should be organizing an insurrection against the state. And in any case, no one should be asking for a separate state, right? When the insurgencies began in the Northeast in the 50s, 56, the insurgency began in Nagaland. It began simmering from 47, 48 onwards. Separatism was a driving this thing for the insurgency. Similarly, insurgency when it took place in Mizoram, because Mizoram followed Nagaland, Manipur, then Tripura, and parts of Assam. So there was Assam had a different connotation. It was to do with the traditional people of Assam being not having being overwhelmed by outsiders.
Right.
That was the reason why the insurgency in Assam took place. But in Nagaland, it was the Naga tribes, Mizoram, Mizo tribes, Manipur a mix, because Manipur has got Naga overlapping, and also the traditional people of Manipur. Then Tripura had again a mix of both. Then there's sanctuaries available in Burma. So the driving force initially in Nagaland predominantly was separatism, to have a separate state. But the governments over a period of time firstly wore down the insurgents through very legitimate military actions over the years, beginning in 1956. And then from the erstwhile large Assam state, the smallest political entities to fulfill the political aspirations of various groups were formed. Yeah. Autonomous regions were created, like we have the Bodo Autonomous Region. Yeah. And in certain areas where the Nagas are, we have Naga Autonomous areas in Assam. And so like that. So then one large state became 7 states, and political governments have been formed, and the police, courts, everything is functioning normally. The separatist sentiment is no longer there. Okay. So what the insurgency over the years has been reduced to is a kind of an industry. It's a kind of criminal industry. So the runt of the insurgent groups, which at one time numbered thousands, and large gangs of hundreds of insurgents used to be there in the forests, that is just a runt. Small groups armed with weapons smuggled from Burma, and they in cohorts with the criminal elements amongst the police, the bureaucracy, even amongst the politicians, are running a kind of industry where they coerce the local population to cough up money. It's a criminal activity. Now, all this has happened, which can easily be controlled by the police forces. Yet the army has been kept deployed in the Northeast, and large parts of it have been under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. There is no logic for the army to be deployed there anymore. There are far more pressing problems on the borders, both in the northern and western borders, and the army at one stage keeps talking of shortage of troops, etc. Whereas, and here yet we are still deployed, and the Armed Forces Special Powers Act continues to be in vogue, which is today seen as a symbol of state oppression.
Exactly.
Now, when the state itself is politically elected, then what becomes the state? The army becomes the target. Because state is run by political governments, yet the Armed Forces Special Power Act is draconian. So the focus of everyone's attention goes against their army, which is there by default. Because both the central and the state governments have failed to take the army away from the Northeast. So time has now come. BJP has put in a concerted effort, more than any other government, to simulate the Northeast into the mainstream.
Okay.
It is in power in Assam, it's in power in Tripura, as a lead player in Manipur, and in all other states, in one form or the other, it is part of the coalition. Right? It's a stakeholder, both at the center and the state. Everything is functioning normally. Everything is lower. Center itself has now removed the Armed Forces Special Powers Act twice in the last 1 year. They did it on 1st of April last year, and again in March this year. So it has, but there are still some areas where it is kept in vogue. My recommendation in my column is that it's time for the army to go back to the barracks, and the CRPF, the Assam Rifles, reorganized, because they enjoy powers, and presently the Assam Rifles operate under the Army, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But they can also be made, you can pass another act to make them like a police force, where they can act like they're covered by the Code of Criminal Procedure. Okay. So the CRPF is covered by it. So the police, the CRPF, the Assam Rifles, right? They are quite capable of taking care of the insurgency. And I think the government is well on its way to do it. And the sooner we do it, the better it is. And they should, Northeast today, I think, is ready for normal, what should say, a normal system where the law and order is maintained by the government of the day.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, General Panag. I think the discussion really gave us a nuanced understanding of your column this week. So thank you so much, and we will see you next week.